So now I have the pleasure of introducing today's speakers, Cathy Conlow and Kate Dufour. Cathy has been the executive director of Maine Municipal Association since August of 2021, so I guess close to 6 months. Prior to that, she served for a long time as city manager of Bangor and town manager of Orono. Kate has worked for MMA representing the interests of municipal government before the Maine State Legislature for about over 25 years. Her areas of focus include taxation, elections, labor, housing, and appropriations. Before I turn things over to Cathy and Kate, I just want to add that the Mitchell Center has been working with Maine municipalities for a long time. There are nearly 500 municipalities in Maine, so a lot of decisions that shape Maine's economic, social, and environmental future get made at the municipal level. As a result, much of the Mitchell Center's work, which we talk about strengthening connections between knowledge and action, is focused on working with municipalities and other local stakeholders. Way back in 2007, we heard that municipalities needed help with shoreland zoning, kind of where they have land along bodies of water. In this case, it was local municipalities, including Veazey, Bangor, Orrington, and Hamden, that wanted help figuring out how to make shoreland zoning work better along the Penobscot River. So we organized a team-taught interdisciplinary course in which 8 faculty from all different fields, political science, economics, engineering, water resources, conservation biology, all worked together with a bunch of students. The students themselves worked with the municipalities in interdisciplinary teams, and a lot of interesting research products came out of that, some of which municipalities put right to use. So that was an early experience of working with municipalities. Later, another group of Mitchell Center faculty began focusing on challenges associated with the management of solid waste, which, among other things, is a major expense for municipalities and local taxpayers. That work continues right up to the present in municipalities as well as state government and with non-governmental organizations. And it includes the work that the PFAS team that I mentioned earlier is now doing, which is connected to some of these solid waste management issues. So one reason we invited Cathy and Kate to talk today is to see whether there are other ways we can work together with municipalities to create a brighter future in Maine. And so I've been looking forward to this talk for a long time. The title of their talk is The Role of Municipal Government in Implementing State Policy Priorities. Welcome, Cathy and Kate.
Hello, everybody. I am Kate Dufour. What we're going to do is I'm going to run us through this presentation, and then Cathy and I will be available to take questions. And for those of you that might have been a witness to this pre-meeting, you absolutely know that I'm a troglodyte. Obviously, technology is not my thing, but 2 other important points to know about me is that I am actually a graduate of UMaine. I have a master's in public administration. I left the program and I went to MMA, and I haven't left since. So I'm very familiar with your programs, and my time at UMaine and Orono was some of the best times of my life. I also serve on the Hallowell City Council, so I have spent a lot of time in municipal government, both professionally and as a volunteer. And the intent of this conversation is to talk about the municipal role in advancing state policy. And over the next decade, municipal governments are going to be asked to do quite a bit. And when we talk about sustainability, from our perspective, we're talking about economic development, we're talking about climate change, we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about these statewide policies where municipal officials and municipalities are going to have to play a very important role. But in order to understand the municipal role, what we really need to do is take a step back and understand what municipal government actually is. So in order to start discussing the municipal role in implementing statewide policies, we need to understand and recognize four things: what municipal government is, the extent to which the state relies on municipal governments, how municipal government services are funded, and the power of local ingenuity. And that's the most important one to us as advocates for local government. And so I'm going to run us through a little exercise. And what I want you to do is, when I say the term municipality, what visual comes to your mind? In some cases, I would suspect it's a building. Maybe it's a city hall, a fire department, a library. In other cases, it may be a program like a park or parks and recreation or any type of program. And I suspect that at least one of you thinks of, when you hear municipal government, you think of this guy, right? Grumpy, old, completely disconnected to the issues that are of great importance to you. But that's only one person. I would propose to you that municipal government is actually community, that we are all a member of a municipality. And it's not surprising that municipal and community are terms that are interchangeable. We come from municipalities, we come from a community. And in order for us to advance these important state policies, we need to understand who we actually are. And again, this is just a photo of, again, I come from the city of Hallowell. This is a photo of a public hearing that we held when we were going to invest money in the Stevens Commons. And if you're familiar with the city of Hallowell, Stevens Commons was a development that the state owned, historic buildings that they abandoned. They were no longer interested in using it. And a developer in the community came up to the city and said, I want to make the development. And so as a community, we worked. And now we have an incredible commons with historic buildings that have been restored. We have the University of Maine of Augusta has a campus there. We have low-income housing. We have market housing, we have our fire department, and we have a little restaurant up in there. So it's community that made that happen. And what's important, when we realize community or municipal government is me, it's you, it's your family, it gets a little harder to criticize municipal government, because at times I think it's very easy to point fingers. Well, we can't advance this public policy because of 7 or 5 or 3 municipal officials who are standing in our way. But we are municipal government. And a decision not to get involved at the community level is a decision. And it comes with consequences that your voices are not heard. And I understand that everybody's busy. No, not everybody can run for office or wants to run for office. But I would encourage you to get involved. Attend a planning board meeting. Find out when your council or town your select board meets. Attend those meetings. Look at the agendas. Maybe there's an issue that's important to you. It's important that your voices are heard, because if we don't hear a diverse group of voices, we'll never be able to advance a public policy that really takes into account all of our differences. So now that we've established that we are actually community, we need to understand how state government has leaned on municipalities to provide services throughout the decades. So when Maine first became a state, municipal governments were providing traditional services. So, well, to the extent we had police and fire in 1820, but the public safety, public works, parks and recreation, tax assessment and collection, elections, general assistance. Those are the foundation, those types of services are the foundation of municipal government. However, over time, municipalities have been relied upon to provide an ever increasing or list of responsibilities. So our to-do list has grown exponentially over the decades. And not only has that list grown, the issues that we are required to address have become more technical and complicated. So over time, we're now providing animal control services. We're licensing automobile graveyards. We're reviewing and approving subdivision application. We are managing solid waste programs, which frustrating to us is also often referred to as municipal solid waste. And that's frustrating because it's not only municipalities that generate waste, but everybody in our community's boundaries are generating that waste. And that is one of the most expensive services that municipalities are mandated to provide on behalf of the state. And so, again, there's more. We had to implement the Growth Management Act. We have to provide code enforcement services. We administer 2 very complicated tax exemption programs. We support K through 12 education, and we also fund the lion's share of county government. Again, this is me, this is you, this is where our property taxes go. And, we have to recognize that over the last couple of years, this administration and this Maine state legislature has done a lot to restore the state municipal partnership. And in the budget that was just recently adopted, revenue sharing, which I will get to in a minute, will increase to $182 million in FY22 and to $210 million in FY23. That will get us to 4.5% and 5% of state sales and income tax, which is shared with municipalities. The state funds local road assistance programs. Roughly $23 million a year is sent to communities to help them manage their road systems. State aid for education. The state is contributing $1.3 billion, which is an increase of $70 million over the last biennium, which has really helped to take the pressure off the property taxpayers. And the state is also increasing its contribution to the homestead exemption by increasing reimbursement by 3% each year until communities are fully reimbursed for that lost property tax revenue. Now, this is incredibly important to municipalities because history has taught us that a once very sacred partnership is incredibly vulnerable. And I would propose to you that the inception of the revenue sharing program is one of the most fundamental municipal state partnerships. And what this program does is it takes 5% of all state sales and income tax that's generated and distributes it to municipality on the basis of mill rate and population. And this is a very important program to municipalities because it recognizes 3 things. 1, there's an over-reliance on the property taxpayers to fund all sorts of services, not only municipal, but school, some state, and counties. And this recognizes that communities don't really have any other revenue sources than the property tax. And so 5% of sales and income tax is generated and shared with municipalities. The program also recognizes the mandates that the state has placed on municipalities. There are services that communities provide because the state legislature has commanded them to do so, and oftentimes without additional resources. And so revenue sharing says, okay, we get this. We'll share some of our broad-based taxes with you to take the pressure off the property tax payers. And then the final reason revenue sharing was enacted is that if not for local level economic development efforts, the states wouldn't generate as much sales and income tax. So we're all in it together. And the program was designed very well. It's been in the books since 1972. And it was designed to share more revenues when times were good, and to reduce the amount of revenues that are shared with communities when the state isn't generating as much revenue. So it recognizes that the state is going to have hard times and that we're all in this together. However, in the last decade, between 2010 and 2019, the legislature started to chip at that partnership. And over time, over a decade, the legislature diverted nearly $700 million of revenue that should have gone to the municipalities for their own purposes. And so what that did is it placed state priorities and state policies ahead of anything that a local community may have wanted to invest in. And so what happened as these raids, we call them raids, we can call them transfers, of revenue sharing started to really accumulate, municipalities had three choices. They could increase property taxes, they could cut services, or a combination of the two. And during this time, when the legislature was slowly taking more and more revenue away from communities, they weren't relaxing the mandates. So it would have been one thing to say, okay, we're going to take $700 million away from you, but you no longer have to manage public waste, or you no longer have to implement the general assistance program. But that's not what was happening. We were required to do more with less. And it really had a devastating impact on that partnership. And when we have been advocating to get back to 5%, which we were finally successful this year, every year I would go up to legislators and I would say, listen, can you help us get back to 5%? This is incredibly important to us. And what I would hear from members of the legislature is not until we have addressed out of control municipal government spending. And so when you look at all the things the state has required us to do, it's hard as somebody who spent her entire career in municipal government to buy this concept of out of control municipal government spending. And when you would ask somebody to say, okay, what in your community is out of control? The response 9 times out of 10 was not my community, that community. And I've never found that community. I've never found a community that whose municipal officers are spending property tax revenue like drunken sailors. I haven't found it. And if you have, that would be great, because I think we should abolish it, because it's really bringing the rest of us down. But I would suggest to you that it doesn't exist. And to the extent that somebody would suggest there's out of control municipal government spending, it may be because that community believes libraries are important, or a park and rec program is important. What I'm trying to say is that one community's priorities are not necessarily another municipality's priorities, and that's okay. The revenue or the programs that town meetings and councils are deciding to fund are based on the community, what we want our communities to look like. So this is just a long-winded way of saying, when one partner has the authority to change all the rules and impacts another partner, that erodes trust in partnerships. It just doesn't work. And it also decreases the appetite for future engagement. That really, can we trust that we can move forward and make things happen? Now, I'm sure everyone knows how municipal services are funded, but it bears repeating. And it bears repeating because it's a good illustration of the pressure that is placed on property taxpayers to fund government services. And so this is revenue. We conduct a fiscal survey every year, and we use the data that we receive to project statewide revenues and statewide expenditures. And in 2019, if you treated the state of Maine as one giant community, we raised $4.9 billion to fund a slew of government services. Of that total, 56% was raised by the property taxpayers alone. That is a significant amount of burden placed on property taxpayers, the most regressive tax that this state has, because your property tax bill has nothing to do with your ability to pay. It has to do with your assessed value, whereas income has to do with your income, and sales, there's some discretion associated with paying the sales tax. So we are putting a lot of pressure as a state on the property taxpayers. And when you look at where municipalities spend their money, you'll find that of every dollar of property tax raised, or every dollar that comes into municipalities, 49 cents goes to schools and 3% goes to the county. So there is 56% or 56 cents on every dollar that the community really has no control over. These are bills that must be paid. In some communities that still have their municipal school systems, there's a little more control over that side of the budget. But for most of us who are now members of RSUs, there's really relatively no ability to control that side of the budget. So we are already behind the 8 ball when we're raising $1 of property tax and we're giving away 56 cents. So with what is left, municipalities first have to fund state mandates, and then they fund whatever projects that their community desires. And that's of great frustration to communities, that we are relied upon to fund and provide services, which we don't mind. We get it. We have a very important role. If I haven't said this already, municipal government is the best form of government there is. And it's not just because I work for the Maine Municipal Association, but it's because it's closest to the people, it's largely nonpartisan, and people get work done. So despite all these frustrations, I know I've painted quite the picture of the municipal state partnership, but despite all the challenges and the burdens and the responsibilities that have been laid at municipal government, municipalities are doing great work. And again, not just the building or the few elected officials, but all of us, you, me, everybody in our community. And I asked my staff to help go through newspaper articles and identify some positives that we're seeing out there. And I was very surprised by the number of headlines that are out there, because sometimes I think we focus on just the bad stories, right? A police officer does something bad, that's what's in the news. A town manager, misses a meeting, that's what's in the news. But we don't often hear about what communities are doing and what we are doing well. And here's just a bunch of examples. We get a few municipalities teaming up to bring broadband into their communities because it's the right thing to do and something the town needs. A small community in northern Maine is looking to invest $10 million in public sewer system because they believe that's the vision for their community. Firefighters in your neck of the woods created their own training facility because there were no revenues available to do so. And they created a training facility that meets their unique needs. In Bar Harbor, the climate task force has been meeting, and the student member, a member of the high school, is really excited because this will give the town the blueprint of where to move in the future. And so there is example after example after example of where municipalities do the right thing. And it gets back to that ingenuity, local control, the ability to figure out how best to move your communities forward. So why are these conversations important? I think, again, the issues facing local governments are increasingly complex. We're going to be relied upon to help the state, and not only the state, the nation, and the world, address some pretty significant issues: climate change, housing, homelessness, economic development. And I would suggest to you that at the crux of sustainability is equity and mutual accountability. All of these impacts are going to be borne by every one of us. And it's important that we all work together. Now, not every community will be able to save the world or even wants to, but we need to work together, and we need to work in the same direction to ensure that our goals are met. So how do we get there? So I would suggest there are 4 things that we have to take into account. The first is we need to continue to build strong and mutual beneficial partnerships. We need to figure out which entity of government or which public or private entity is best suited to deliver whatever the end goal is. We need to figure out how best to fund that and who needs the technical assistance. So a good assessment of, and this bleeds into the next one, assessing which entity is more appropriate to provide a service. That's really important. The default cannot be municipal government at every turn because it's there and the most convenient, but we really need to think about who should be delivering a service and how funds and technical assistance will be delivered to the entity that's responsible for that, providing the service. The other is, again, we really need to honor Maine's home rule history and encourage local ingenuity. Again, and it's to the extent that municipalities are going to be called upon to help implement state policies, funding needs to follow, technical and technical assistance needs to follow. We cannot rely solely on the property taxpayers to fund and resolve statewide issues. We need help. And some of you probably don't remember, but we had a state planning office several years ago. It was abolished in 2015. And that state planning office was a very important partner to municipalities. They provided services, they provided guidance, they provided technical assistance that is now missing. And so, again, if we're going to call on municipal government to help resolve these issues, we really need to build the support systems that will help communities succeed. And, we talk about home rule authority, and it's near and dear to my heart. And I would suggest that many of us have a love-hate relationship with home rule. When it supports our own priorities, we think it's the most awesome thing in the world. But when we object to policies that are being advanced because of home rule authority, suddenly it needs to be limited. It's almost like freedom of speech. When we like what we hear we're okay. But when it makes us uncomfortable, sometimes we're not liking it so much. And so when home rule is called into question, it's always described as a patchwork quilt, that all these communities are doing all these different things. And there's no uniformity, and that the state should come in and dictate or mandate what communities should do to address a particular issue. And we look at patchwork quilts, and it's always discussed as a negative thing, like a bad thing. But when you consider what patchwork quilts are, they're basically random scraps of fabric. They're sewn together to make these beautiful, diverse, unique blankets. It's a place where you feel at home. And there's a community for each and every one of us. And Cathy has said this, and I completely bought into it. Her point is Bangor, because Bangor is Bangor, VZ gets to be VZ. And so if you think of the area you're from, and I'll just use Hollowell. Hollowell gets to be this kind of weird music bar scene because Augusta stepped up to the plate and provides the service center type of services. And Farmingdale gets to be Farmingdale because Hollowell is Hollowell and Augusta is Augusta, and so on and so on. There is a community for each and every one of us, and that uniqueness is incredibly important. To get rid of it would destroy our blankets, our communities. So again, the honoring Maine's home rule history, local ingenuity, and the ability of communities to solve their issues in a manner that best fits their residents is very important. And then finally, we need to evaluate policies and programs to ensure that they're delivering the intended goals. I think too often, we just implement something without the assessment, without the evaluation, and we just move forward. And it's important that if we're going to invest state, local, and federal resources, that we make certain those solutions are working. And if they're not working, that's fine. That's really no big deal. We just need to reevaluate, maybe change the course, and make certain that we are making strides forward rather than going back. And then I'm just going to wrap up with one last thing. When we were asked to participate in this event, David asked us, what can the university do to help us? And Cathy will have her own answer, but my perspective is get involved. I know many of you have participated in internships, and you've maybe participated in your local communities in some capacity, but I would encourage you to get involved. Go to a planning board meeting, go to a town meeting, volunteer to the extent that you can, because your voices are incredibly important. And without that voice, we cannot build solutions that address your issues. So I thank you for your time, and I will try to turn this whole gig back over to you for questions and answers.
Well, let's thank Cathy and Kate. Well, we're going to hear from Cathy next. Kate. And if I can just jump in for a second before I let Linda handle some of the discussion. I attended my first planning board meeting at the age of 17, not exactly in Maine, but same idea. And it was, got to do my video, sorry. It had a huge impact on my thinking about even how people within universities that do various kinds of science and research, how that work could connect with real world problems. So I take your point, Kate, that getting involved can be really rewarding, and it certainly was for me. Linda, do you want to take it for a bit?
Sure. This was all just so interesting and so informative, and really, really gave us a lot to think about. Let's start with the solid waste that you mentioned. That's just huge, and you know, thinking about strategies. And I mean, when I was a kid, basically we'd go over there and watch people throwing things in and doing picking from it, and had no idea sort of what was going on and what needed to be done. There's a wonderful group that works through the Mitchell Center that brings together people from throughout the campus to think about what we could do to think about solid waste, and what kind of research might be needed, what kinds of policies might be needed. How does Maine quit being the place that gets the trash from other places? This is kind of a long answer, but when I worked down in Lowell, over and over again, the Cambodians who lived there would talk about all the trash that was going to Cambodia and ruining their country. So tell us a little bit how we think about those issues and ways that the university, the students here, the faculty, that we can learn from you and we can work together.
I can take a shot at that. That's a really complex question. And so as manager of Bangor and Orono, I've been involved certainly with the issue of solid waste up in the region. And I think if you guys remember, you probably were involved a few years ago as we started to analyze, the university was extensively involved as we started to analyze the municipal resources. I was on the board for 9 years and now I can't remember the name. The MRC's solution, which included the fiber rate facility in Hamden. If you go back, we had a convergence of a number of events that occurred all at once. The subsidies that were going to the PERC plant included $20 million a year. And the plant was built, and I'm sure out of good intention back in the 1990s or 80s, to accept expansion of materials. So it required a certain amount of waste to operate, and yet the municipalities were unable to deliver that waste. And so it became, we took the $20 million that we received in subsidies. Some of it went back to subsidize solid waste in the municipalities, and a portion of it was then used to subsidize the importation of waste. So you took the cost of disposal plus the cost of transportation. And so we were importing a significant amount of waste to make that plant work year round. It worked. We had more waste in the summer when we had tourists, and less waste in the winter. So as we started to look at the solution, the waste never materialized in the region, which is a good thing, right? Lots of reasons why there was less waste. And so the plant, when the $20 million went away, the municipalities, the 187 municipalities, needed to find a way to manage their waste. I've been a strong supporter of the partnership. I think at the time, Bangor could probably have found a solution on its own, but if Bangor walked away, it would be very challenging for it would be very challenging for small municipalities in northern Maine to come up with a real balanced solution. The fiber rights solution at the time, and in the short period of time that it operated, was super successful in that it was removing and reprocessing a lot of the waste. So if you look at what happens when we reverse the trend of recyclables, we were driving trucks around the municipalities, we were picking up recyclables, we were delivering them to Massachusetts, they were bundled and sent overseas. I'm not sure, and then later we learned that much of it, I couldn't tell you where that went, but much of it ended up in landfills overseas. So recycling, and I was a big proponent of it in the early 90s. In the beginning of my career, I was a solid waste manager in Oregon for a county. So I've always had it near and dear to my heart. This fiber rate solution really worked. It was analyzed by a team at the university, and it really had a lot of promise in terms of allowing us to process, harvest, and market our own recyclables. And one of the interesting things, like the individual who was in the plant identified a lot of those K-cup, and then worked directly with the Keurig folks to try to find a way to reprocess, repurpose those K-cups. So there was a lot of opportunity in that. It was I hope that it comes back. It's been a challenge since. The recycling from northern parts of Maine, where it's all contaminated. The other challenge we had is we told everybody to stick it out on the curb, and if you stick your recyclables out, magically they go away. But when you mix your tuna fish can with your number 3 plastic, all of a sudden you've wasted the entire load, which then you've rounded up in a separate truckload you've taken somewhere else. I always thought if the university could analyze, if a student project at some point in time could analyze sort of the environmental and physical costs of these recycling programs, and start to give us some opportunity as to how to identify the best ways to do that. Because I do think we need to remove stuff from the waste stream. I was a strong believer that wasn't really this single sort, one bin all in, goes on a separate route and gets trucked all over the place, wasn't really the answer. So the university, I think, could be instrumental if we could line up something that would help us sort of determine the best way to really manage what is trash and what is recyclable, and really pull it out. And maybe it means going back to all source separated materials and not single. I don't know. That was just one thought. At the time, I thought if the university could help us analyze what the real cost of recycling is, maybe that, then we start to find a real solution to it. If we start to understand that maybe what we're doing isn't that effective, and we start to find a real solution to how to deal with it. I don't think it's trucking things.
That's just such a great answer. How do you have so much up here that so many people don't yet understand, and just finding a way that people can hear what you have to say and help us think about what the university could do. And in fact, there's a great group that's thinking about some of those things. Someone in the audience was saying, okay, so we lost the state planning office. What does that mean in terms of who's picked up what's not being done now? Does it mean it's taking us longer to figure out what to do? We're not getting transfer of knowledge, or kind of what's going on there? And can you help us understand it in a way that we might think about, is there anything the university could do? Thank you.
So the state planning office was a wonderful resource for municipalities. It was a trusted third party that you could run ideas by, and really provided technical assistance to municipalities. They were a go-to. And when they were working well and well organized, anything, you had a recycling question, you could go to the state planning office and ask about how should we implement this policy. They were leads on comprehensive planning and how best to approach comprehensive planning. So they were a third party that we could trust. They weren't the legislature per se, but they provided good advice. And as an example, between my first and second year of my graduate program, I helped the town of Madawaska craft their comprehensive plan. And so I checked in with the state planning office, and I'm old, so we did mail and phone. And within a week, I got a box of materials from the state planning office that had everything from assessed values to the point at Long Lake where it's the deepest. There was such valuable information in that box that was consolidated and coordinated. And they were a clearinghouse for us. So, DEP had something, the state office knew it. If the Department of Ag had something, SBO knew it. So what happened is we got away from a one-stop shopping opportunity to silos, agency silos. And when agencies don't speak to each other, sometimes policies end up getting at cross purposes. And, there's another, and I'll just jump to another question that I just read, about, pesticide ordinances. Why are municipalities getting involved in pesticide ordinances? Well, it may frustrate agriculture or forestry, but we have DEP breathing down our necks about the quality of water. And so we need to figure out how best to address all these issues that are being raised, because if we don't do the right thing, we can get financially penalized. And so I think that gets back to that disconnect when one state agency says do Y, but another state agency is saying do X. So that was the importance of the state planning office, a coordinating clearinghouse for municipal governments.
Thank you. One of the questions in the chat is, it's long, but the essence is, seems like home rule efforts are all about avoiding state regulatory programs like food sovereignty ordinances, and that then impacts health. I bet you have some opinions and thoughts on that question.
Well, with respect to food sovereignty, the important thing to know about home rule authority, it's not all absolute. There are areas of law where the state has preempted home rule authority. And food protection is an issue that municipalities are not able to regulate, that the state and federal food, FDA laws regulate. And so I think one of the frustrations with the food sovereignty ordinance approach is that the things that municipalities are being asked to do, they can't do. Some other agency is responsible for that. So it's almost, you can adopt these resolutions or you can adopt an ordinance, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to food safety, it's the state and federal government that preempts local control.
And I do think that's an important note. In every state I've been in, we talk, I've worked in Oregon and Minnesota, and Oregon, certainly we talked a lot about home rule, but home rule is only what has not been reserved by the state and federal government. So it's not as all powerful. It could be more powerful in it could be more powerful in one state, depending on what's regulated and what's left for the municipalities in another state. But it's certainly, I've had a lot of people come to me and say, well, why can't we just do this? I think one was a local option sales tax under home rule. And, you know, the states tell us how we can tax. So home rule is not the silver bullet we're all looking for in terms of regulating issues with municipalities.
Thank you. The last week, the presentation that we had was on digital storytelling. It was about sort of how do we bring together stories and kind of put them in a form that we understand how people are feeling about things and we save them somewhere. So, oops, can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
It just went. So which part did you hear?
We just missed you for a couple words, Linda.
Okay. So basically and it was exciting to hear these ideas about we lose stories and we need to have a way to have those stories. And when I hear and when we all hear about all the knowledge you have, it just seems so important to think about how do communities save stories using new technologies, have problem solving in them. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's interesting. I haven't really given it much thought. The Coal Land Transportation Museum has been doing quite a bit of story capturing for decades over at the museum with young children and vets. And I certainly think it's a viable tool, and there's lots of ways to do that. So I haven't really given that much thought, though. I don't know if Kate has any. We've tried in Bangor, at least we did some videos in order to, I think, to use it as a retention tool or an attraction tool. And I do think that they're going to be more popular. I think one of the interesting, my nephew who works for the National Park Service, and he was in California and there are fires. And as the pandemic went on, I have 5 siblings and lots of nieces and nephews, and we started talking about where was the better place to live. And I grew up in the Philadelphia area, and so I have a brother who's living in Philadelphia, and he was talking about all the places that he had to walk and places he could go, and that's wonderful. And then I started rolling videotapes that we had done of our city forest and our open spaces in our parks. And so we sort of started doing this one-upmanship. And I remember my nephew coming back to me and saying, if I had seen that before we decided to move from California to Pennsylvania, I would have gone to Maine. So I think that storytelling is a way to talk about place and who we are as people and what we offer as community is certainly a powerful tool if done right. And so certainly, you know, for open space, economic development, sense of place, but yeah, there probably are a lot of stories that need to be captured out there from individuals who have, I look at people like Woodrow Cross, who was an icon at in Bangor, or Galen Cole, who was an amazing guy, capturing those stories and what the community meant. Both of them, I think, at one point in their career worked on the old auditorium in downtown Bangor, which is now gone. So there are just these great stories out there, and maybe that's the role where libraries come in and find a new role. The Bangor Library is an amazing resource. The Orono Library, municipalities across the state have libraries, and maybe that's where we go. It's a neat idea.
Hey, Linda, could I pick up on something that got discussed earlier and just go back to
You
when
bet.
you were asking the questions about solid waste management? And so in a way, Cathy's, I can see even more than I understood how complicated that issue is here and in a lot of places, from local to kind of global impacts and consequences. But for me, there's a kind of more general thing that connects to one of the points that Kate made, where she was saying, a key thing here is to build strong and mutually beneficial partnerships. And so then, whether it's solid waste or it's community and economic development writ large, it's some local environmental problem or a broad one, what do you from the Maine municipal perspective see ways that we could build kind of more sustained partnerships? We stay in conversation more between the universities, say, and we can do this at a lot of scales. Obviously, in Orono, people here worked with you and worked with Evan Rickert and others. But is there a missing piece? And full disclosure for the audience, Evan was the head of the state planning office, and he's now on the Mitchell Center Advisory Board. So that's one of the reasons we keep working on these issues. But is there something about the way we keep these conversations going that benefit from the sort of local ingenuity that Kate talked about, but bring a new generation of students and faculty maybe that have just arrived here and are trying to figure out what to work on? Any thoughts about how to make that work on more steadily, I guess, as opposed to sort of in a hit and miss way?
So Kate did touch on this. I think that sometimes when it's about doing the work, right? And I think we've talked about this at times. A lot of times we get people who want to pass resolves or pass, they ask a municipality, and there were a lot of them going around from middle school kids earlier this year on climate action planning. And one of the things and this was when the draft of the governor's Maine Can't Wait plan came out. One of the things that I said to the council is that this is a meaningless order. And I don't mean that the effort that the young people it wasn't written by young people, but I didn't mean that the effort to get that passed was meaningless, but that the order had all kinds of things in there not really tied to reality. So if we're going to do a resolve, let's do it meaningfully and pull people in and keep them engaged. And Orono was going through a similar process, and it enabled us to engage on a larger scale. I think that if we're going to tackle issues like solid waste, which has a sustained partnership, which has a role for a larger community, if we're going to make sustained changes in the climate, if we're really going to make meaningful change, we're going to need those partnerships to make that happen. And it means the state, it means municipalities, it means county. The problems today are significantly more challenging than they were, to me, than they were in the past. You're talking about issues that we up in the northern Maine, or in Maine in general, haven't faced. homelessness on a more sustained basis, housing and affordability, and lots of these different sticky issues that are going to require more data-driven decisions, more research. It's gonna take more effort from all of us to work together to make those things, to come up with solutions. And I see a really major role for the university in helping us do the research, do the work, and stay with it. And if there's that flywheel, right, that's there, and there's the university professors or the Mitchell Institute that can keep that flywheel turning, then it's not necessarily dependent on one or two students, but that the next set of students. My daughter worked in the VEMI lab, and when one student graduates, the next one comes in, and they keep the work going. And I think we're all going to need to engage in that to make meaningful change, because we're getting to the point where some of these issues just require far more resources and understanding and research than can be done by a small municipality.
And one of the things that faculty love is complex problems that call for decision support tools and thinking about these things and working with partners to do them. Am I right, Dave?
Sure are. Yeah. 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 And so I maybe this is going beyond this talk, but let's look for those ways to spend more time finding the common ground where we can bring some of the university's resources. I think, again, back to some of the wonderful points that Kate was making, sort of evaluating programs and policies is another place where the university can, those become student projects that can be really great for a graduate student. I realized that some of the programs, like Kate, the one you were in, aren't the same now, but students are still very interested in working on these things, and we've got some wonderful faculty. And if anything, I think we've done a better job of getting faculty from many different parts of the university to work together and to bring students around the table, like with Linda's very involved in the solid waste management work. And off the top of my head, there are engineers, social psychologists, economists, anthropologists, water experts,
Health people.
All on that. So, I mean, we're doing better than a lot of places in actually breaking down our own silos to mobilize that kind of expertise. Now we want to figure out how to make sure we're aligning it with the kind of expert knowledge and know-how that municipalities have. And we recognize it'll take a while. Go ahead, Linda.
And if I can add just one, I know we're nearly out of time, but the last question that was here is from Cathy Conlow, and says she's excited by the support for partnerships and the recognition of local ingenuity. Do Cathy or Kate have ideas about ways to support better partnerships, including collaborations across municipalities? I think that's a great ending one.
Yeah, great question, Kathleen. Take it, you guys, to close us out.
I think that climate action and solid waste, we haven't resolved the solid waste issue yet in the state. So certainly those are great opportunities. I think that remembering that the scale of municipalities can vary and the capacity of municipalities can vary. And I think that sometimes when municipalities give over to partnerships, it can feel a little overwhelming and daunting if the asks are so heavy that a smaller municipality can't sustain that level of effort. So I think it's a recognition across the board that everybody brings something unique and special to the table. And I think there are ways to do that through climate action planning. But if you think about sort of the heavy lift in terms of the goal, how daunting that could be for an Alton, for example, up in that region, or a smaller town. And so how do we make it so that it's proportional and not overwhelming, that we chase our partners away, because the partnerships aren't really effective if everybody's not at the table. So it's kind of and then sometimes the solutions are so complicated that they chase away the people we need. So that's, I think, one of the challenges.
I would add, we have to address voids of regional governance in the state. So there are, in some counties, there are incredible county municipal relationships. So it makes testing partnerships or entering into partnerships a little easier. In other areas of the state, planning commissions and governments play that role of enabling or fostering regional cooperation amongst municipalities. But there are areas of the state that there's neither a good county municipal working relationship nor another entity to step up and really unite communities and help them focus on, here is an issue that we can advance if we work all together.
I was just going to say there are many questions in the chat, many more than we can get to. People were excited about what you had to say. And so we're hoping that you can look at those and if you have a chance, respond to them because you have so much knowledge.
Yeah, and on that note, I think we're at time. I want to thank Kate and Cathy again for a great talk. And let's find those, let's build some more partnerships together, okay?